Uh, Question. It's actually asked in connection with my video about non-self, the nonsense of non-self. Yes, is the self that is being referred to a personal self or the one and only self? And I have actually talked about that in several other videos, but just I wanted to comment on it because of this expression, the one and only self. And as I've explained, we have our total being consists of three parts. Right now we have an outer personality. I talk about 4 levels of the mind. There's the identity level, the mental level, the emotional, and the physical. And in this outer personality we have all these subconscious selves that are individual structures, beings, reactionary patterns, and they make up what's commonly called the ego. And the reason why I talk about this is because when you break the ego down into these individual parts, it's much easier to deal with. You can take one at a time instead of thinking you're dealing with this big, huge, non-differentiated ego. And so this is the outer personality. But behind that outer personality is what I call the conscious you. And this is a self that it doesn't have any outer personality. It really doesn't have any structure. It's just awareness. It's almost like you can say, right now, I'm sitting here. I'm physically looking at this camera. You are sitting in front of the screen and you are physically looking at me. If we were sitting across from each other, we would be looking at each other. You're looking at me from the outside, I'm looking at you from the outside. Well, this is comparable. It's a metaphor, but it's comparable to what I call the conscious you. Behind my body is a conscious you that is like, this is the vantage point from which I am looking at the world. So this is my body. I can turn around and look at the world. It's the conscious you, it's the same. It's simply just a point from which you are observing the world. It doesn't have the outer personality. But this conscious you doesn't exist on its own. It's an extension of the third part of your being, your higher self, your I am presence. And the reason for this is complicated. I explained this in my video about how the world was created, but it basically is the I am presence cannot take embodiment on earth. So it sends an extension of itself. It's in a sense you could say, if a crude metaphor again, you see you have these devices that the police sometimes use. They have this long fiber optic cable, and there's a little camera at the end that they could stick it under the door so they can see what's going on in the room. So in a sense you could say your I am presence is up there in the spiritual realm, and the conscious you is sent down to be the lens that the I am presence is experiencing the world through. The complication of it is that when a metaphor breaks down is the conscious you has free will. So it actually determines, it can make its choices. So is the self that is being referred to a personal self? Well, the outer personality, yeah, that's a personal self. That is ultimately not real. It's something we created in response to this world. But behind the personal self is the conscious you, which is a real self. But it is not permanent. It's an extension of the I am presence. The I am presence is in the spiritual realm, but it is not yet an immortal ascended being. It becomes that when you ascend. And when you ascend, the conscious you merges back into the I am presence. So the reason why I wanted to comment on this, because I know I've said everything I've said so far, I've said before in other videos, but it's this expression, the one and only self. And this is a concept you find in various spiritual teachings, Eastern teachings, but also the modern non-duality, neo-Advaita teachings. And the reason why I want to comment on it is that what would this one and only self be? Where would it exist? What would it be? Think about it. You're saying there is one only self. There's only one self. You hear this a lot. There's only one self. There's only one of us here. What could it possibly be? And as I said before, with pure awareness, there's some non-dual teachers that say that behind everything is just pure awareness. And we as an individual being, we are just an illusion. We are like pure awareness has forgotten itself. And everything we experience is just a dream. And we just need to awaken from the dream, and then we disappear back into pure awareness. But what is pure awareness? What would it be? I mean, where does it exist? How does it exist? Why did it manifest itself as us? So what I'm explaining in several of my videos, including several of my non-duality videos, including one about how the world was created, is we live in a particular world of form. There is a world around us that has form. It's not a dream in the sense that it was created by our minds. This is simply, again, a misunderstanding. There is a world. There is a planet Earth. The dream is when we are experiencing the world through the outer self, because everything we see through the outer self is distorted, just like it is in a dream. That's a dream. That's correct. But there is a world because that world was manifest by beings in a much, much higher state of consciousness than we have. So in other words, we are here and we are actually in a non-permanent world. And I explained this in a video about how the world was created. The world was created in stages. So there have been spheres before ours that ascended and became permanent, but ours is an undescended sphere, meaning nothing here is permanent. So we are here on Earth, which happens to be a very dense planet with a dense collective consciousness, which I also explained. So we are severely limited by our environment in what we can see. And the choice we basically have is we can seek to explain the world from this state of a separate self. And this is what you see in many religions, philosophies, ideologies out there. Or we can seek to connect to a higher level of reality than the world we are in. And as I explained, there is a spiritual realm beyond ours, which is the spheres that ascended before ours was created. And in that spiritual realm, there are beings who have ascended, and therefore they are not in the state of consciousness we're in. They're not limited. Their vision is not limited. And through those beings, we can learn how the world is actually created and how it functions. And when we connect to these ascended masters, we realize that, as I said, we are in the lowest, the densest, the most primitive part of our total creation that has many levels. And we can go up through these levels. And as we go up and up and up, we end up with an ultimate being, which is the creator. I call it the creator. And this is an individual being, a distinct individual being. But it has, of course, a state of consciousness that is so far beyond ours that we cannot fathom it. If we try to describe it or put words on it or concepts on it, we are just creating a fantasy. We can't fathom it at all. But it is still an individual being. And beyond the creator are, first of all, there's a whole level with the other creators. There's a level that they call the allness, where you have beings that are not creating a world that evolves through stages, but it's an unchanging world. And again, this is very, very difficult to fathom for us. So what I'm trying to say is that there is no one and only self. There's our creator, and there's many other creators, and there's something even at a higher level of awareness than the creator. So there's no one and only self that we could ever experience on Earth. Whether there's a one and only self ultimately, I don't know. But from our vantage point, what we could experience here on Earth, there is no one and only self that we can connect to. So why do some spiritual teachings have this idea? Well, that's because, as I also explained in my video, when the Creator decided to create our world of form, it decided to create an environment for our growth. It's basically an educational institution for our growth in awareness. And it decided to send self-aware extensions of itself into that world and give us free will. And it knew that we could potentially, by using our imagination and free will, we could create this kind of a separate self that has created this entire dream world, but we are absolutely convinced it's real. And therefore we could become stuck in our own creation. We could literally become trapped indefinitely in our own creation. And in order to avoid this, the Creator first created the one mind. You can also call it the Christ mind or the Buddha nature. So created the one mind, and everything else, every form is created out of the one mind. And so we can go into this state of separation where we create our own sense of reality. But even that is created out of the one mind, which means that no matter what illusions we have created, we can always reconnect to the one mind that will help us see through a particular illusion so we can free ourselves from it and get closer and closer to oneness with the higher self. In other words, the one mind is the safety mechanism. And so what I'm saying here is, we can connect to the one mind, we can experience the one mind. And I believe this is why you have spiritual teachings that have this, the one and only self. But it's only the one and only self in relation to our world of form. It's not some ultimate self. And I just think it's important to understand that, because otherwise you have this idea out there that there's this one and only undifferentiated amorphous self. Is again this, only Brahman is real, the world is an illusion. And so people think that anything that's differentiated is an illusion, but it's not. The Creator is differentiated, but the Creator is real, it's not an illusion. Ascended Masters are differentiated. They are not illusions, they are real beings. You are a real being. You just currently potentially see yourself through the illusory outer self that you've created. And so you might identify yourself as that, yes. But ultimately, you are real. Your I am presence is a real being because it's created out of the Creator's being. So let me just try and illustrate this with a one mind, the Christ mind, right? So you have here square, circle, triangle, star, all of these forms. They are obviously differentiated, right? They're different forms. And so if you are focusing at the level of form, you are going to see them as very different. And so what has happened with the non-dual teachers is they have thought suffering appears at this level where we have these distinct forms, or rather distinct selves. That's why we are suffering, because we have this, they would say, individual self, but I'm saying separate self. So we have this. So what's the key? Well, it is to come to a point where we have no form. Where we are undifferentiated again. But what I'm saying is, no, the purpose is actually to overcome the separate self, so we realize we are actually distinct individual beings. And how do we do this? By connecting to the one mind. In other words, we have our outer selves. There are structures in those outer selves that are illusory. They are a dream. They are unreal. But the reason why we could create these structures is that we, our real being, is created out of the one mind. Right? So what does that mean? What is the one mind? Well, when I draw something on here, what are you focused on? You're focused on the black lines that I'm creating. right? But did you notice that if there hadn't been a white background, I couldn't have drawn anything? This is the one mind. It's the white background that allows our individual beings to exist. And it's not a matter of wiping out all the individual selves. It's a matter of coming to see that behind all the outer forms is the one mind. And therefore you don't identify yourself with the outer self, the separate self in the 4 levels of the mind. So the non-dual teachers would say that here's you are the square, and in order for you to overcome suffering and reach the highest state of consciousness, you have to erase yourself. No. And here's why. The model I'm running is saying there's a dividing line here. And you, this is the conscious you. You are a point down here. You're just a point. But right now, this point is surrounded by all of these separate selves. You have all of these structures in your subconscious mind, all these separate selves. And you think this is who you are. In reality, you are an extension of this being up here, your I am presence, which is a incredibly complex individuality. Incredibly complex. Very, very beautiful. Absolutely unique. There's no other I am presence like yours. And it was created in the spiritual realm by beings with a much higher state of consciousness than we can fathom here on earth. So it's real, it's beautiful, it's incredible. So right now you're here, you're inside all of this outer structure that's based on duality. What should happen, what shouldn't happen, and this and that. And you're suffering because you're seeing the world through this. And therefore you have lost connection to your higher self. So the key to escaping suffering is not that you erase everything down here, so there's nothing. No. The key is that the conscious you comes to realize that you created all of these structures that block your connection. And you erase them not in one big glorious breakthrough, one at a time, one at a time. So you adjust your sense of self. And there comes a point where, well, you may still have some left, but at some point, all of a sudden there's nothing that blocks your connection to your higher self. And now you're experiencing your higher self. You're experiencing yourself as an extension. And then as you continue to erase, there comes a point where you're no longer identified with these outer structures. You're identified as an extension of the I Am Presence, and you can let the I Am Presence express itself through you. This is what Jesus actually described when he said, I can of my own self do nothing. The conscious you is an extension of the presence. It really can't do anything without the I Am Presence. And he also said, my Father worketh hitherto, and I work. My Father, my I Am Presence, is doing the work. He doeth the work. And that's where you come to, and that's the end of suffering. Because the I Am Presence is not suffering. The conscious you isn't really suffering either. It's only experiencing suffering through these outer selves. But when you get rid of the selves, you just see yourself as an open door for the I Am Presence, and you're not suffering. So that's why I wanted to comment on this, because this concept of the one and only self, even that isn't differentiated, because even this one mind, the Christ mind, yes, it is there, but escaping suffering or being enlightened does not mean you go back into an undifferentiated state. It means you realize who you really are, and then you can keep growing from there. And even the one and only self is not expressed in this world in an undifferentiated form, because the Christ mind is actually can only be experienced in this world through the intercession of beings in the higher realm, the ascended masters. They are the ones who are expressing the Christ mind through their individual beings in this form. And that's why you can feel like you're connecting to the one mind that's undifferentiated, but you're really connecting to a particular ascended master that you have a connection to. So anyway, I noticed a long explanation, but I just thought it's important to really grasp that it's not a matter of attaining a non-differentiated state, of going back to this one and only self. Your self is your unique gift from the Creator. And it's not the goal of spiritual growth to get rid of it. The goal is to transcend it until you reach the same state of consciousness as the Creator. And there's, of course, many reasons for this, but you can just take one. How will you appreciate the world we are in until you attain the same level of consciousness as the being who created it? Only then will you have the full appreciation for how incredible this world of form is. But how do you attain that state of awareness? By gradually working your way up through all the different levels, so that you appreciate each level. And on each level you appreciate more and more until you reach the same level as the Creator. And then you really fully appreciate what an incredible world of form this is, but also what an incredible gift it is for you that you are self-aware as an individual being. Differentiation is not your enemy, it's your gift.